George Sadowsky tried mathematics for a while after graduation, but decided he was on the wrong track and went to work for the oncoming digital revolution. After a stint at a computing firm, he went to Yale to run the computer center and also get a master's degree. In the end, he ended up with a doctorate and went to Washington to work for the Brookings Institution and the Urban Institute, followed by 13 years at the United Nations. He got back into academic computing at Northwestern and then at NYU. He was one of the creators of the Internet, and this led to his induction into the Internet Hall of Fame. His interview focuses on the changes caused by the digital revolution.
I am George Sadowsky. I was born in Novocherkassk, USSR in 1936. We came to the United States in January of 1938, and we've lived here ever since. We've lived in a really interesting period since we graduated. The digital revolution, as I call it, or the information revolution, has essentially touched almost every aspect of our lives, generally for good, but often for bad. When we graduated from college, for big computers, large mainframes were just being developed. And I remember that at Harvard, we had a UNIVAC 1 that was installed in 1957, and I actually programmed it, and it was the result of Howard Aiken, who was a major pioneer in computing. The last 60 years since we graduated from college, we have seen incredible changes in the ability of computers and information products to change our lives. When we graduated from college, big computers were just coming out. They cost $3 million, and that was in 1957 dollars. And we had an initial period where they were used only for scientific computation. They were big, they were expensive, they failed every 2 hours. They were built based on thousands of vacuum tubes, and it was trouble to keep them going. I got a programming job after college. I went to graduate school here for a year in mathematics. I was a teaching fellow, and I discovered something really important in that year, and that was that I hated pure mathematics. So I got out of college, or out of graduate school. I remember getting a letter from Dean Elder saying, it is the wish of the mathematics department that you pursue your work elsewhere. So I left, and I was really glad to leave. So I got a job programming a computer down at NYU. I worked for a nuclear reactor company in northern Connecticut, and at that point, you didn't take the computers with you like an iPad or a Mac. You went to the computer, and I learned to program it. It was really fascinating. And every year since then, we have had an improvement in performance price of computers. We now carry our computers with us. This is a full-fledged computer that has more power than almost anything else you can name in 1957. And I've watched the ability of the computer to solve more and more problems as it's gotten cheaper and more versatile. The amazing advantage of the computer, and really of the internet, because we're talking not about standalone computers, although they have their place and they've done major things for us, but the ability to network them together has been I think the defining moment in the information revolution. When you think now that anybody with a device, a computer, or even a smartphone, can access knowledge from anywhere else in the world that's where it is online. In 1957, we didn't have that. We had libraries. We had card catalogs. We knew how to use them, and we knew how to network among the very limited group of people who were in our own profession, with whom we dealt, but we couldn't go beyond that very easily. I did a lot of work for the UN. For 13 years, I did technology transfer and installed computers and later networks in developing countries, mostly in Africa initially, then later in Asia. And when you put a computer and an internet connection in an African country, the world opens up. And the people who didn't know that the outside world really existed or what was available, all of a sudden have their knowledge base amplified by, I don't know, a factor of 1,000,000 or 1,000,000,000 or something like that. So when it becomes as easy for somebody in a developing country to get at that knowledge and to understand who's doing what, who to talk to, what to learn, and so on, you really have magnified the potential labor force of the world enormously, as well as helping the country in its own development. Yeah. What has happened, however, is that all of human behavior seems to have moved to into information technology and to the internet. And initially, this wasn't terribly harmful. We played games on the net. I remember I worked at Northwestern University, and people would play games trying to infiltrate other people's computers, and just for fun. The word hacker was an honorable designation at that time, and a good hack was something that would elicit praise from one's contemporaries. That's changed, but what's happened since then is that the bad behavior, the criminal activity, the ransomware, the viruses, the phishing, the spear phishing. What's happening now is that you have behaviors such as cyberbullying, phishing, theft, all helped by the internet. The cybercrime right now is an industry. I can go out, and if I want to have a direct denial of service attack against somebody's website, I can hire somebody to do it. I can tell them how many attack computers I want, for how long, what delivery time, and so on. If I want to save some money, I get a kit, and I do it myself. If I want to if I want to be anonymous on the net, there are ways to do it, and I can do, for example, cyberbullying. If it's anonymous on the net, it's a real threat, and there are people who have committed suicide as a result of being cyberbullied. It's an industry. And it is at least at the present time, it's ahead of our ability to control it. That is, the bad guys are in the lead. This is going to probably increase over time with the Internet of Things coming online, because the things are capable of being captured and are capable of being used to mount attacks. So the near term is not good. The people I know in the field, my contemporaries who study this stuff, are all pessimists. And so I'm a bit of a pessimist, and I think this is something we have to give real attention to in the near future. I don't know quite how it's going to work out yet. The jury's out, and it depends on what we do that's going to make the difference. The most basic solution is to replace the internet with something else. And I don't know how we're going to be able to do that. Vint Cerf, who was a pioneer in the internet, one of the two inventors of the TCP/IP protocol set, said, well, he characterizes the internet as an experiment that escaped the laboratory. And it escaped the laboratory because it was thought that it would be used for education and research. There was no sense that it would grow to be a worldwide nervous system, a worldwide digital infrastructure. And as a result, the issue of security was thought about, but the sense was, well, we're all friends, and we're going to be using this among ourselves, and therefore we don't need to worry about security so much as we need to worry about getting it working and making it available for people to use. Uh, Building another internet at this point is sort of like designing another airplane engine and replacing it in flight. So I don't think that's going to happen. I think we're going to end up continuing to patch and extend and do perhaps even behavioral restrictions on the net that we don't do now. It's not a good situation, and it depends upon the goodwill and the work of all of us to keep it running. Yeah. One area which is problematic for the use of networks and computers is elections. We know that election machines can be hacked. In fact, a professor at the University of Michigan a few years ago, given the challenge of hacking a voting machine, was able to do it in 3 hours. And to prove it, he had the voting machine play the Michigan fight song. This is not good. There are statements now that claim that we have not been hacked at the level of vote counting. There's no way people can know that. A clever programmer can introduce a diversion in the program, can cause certain things to happen, and can then erase the program at the end of the day. So my sense is that we cannot allow voting to be totally automated, totally electronic. And the best technology we have for it is marked sense readers, where in effect you fill out a form, it goes into the machine, the tabulations are done electronically, the votes are transmitted electronically, but you have the paper to go back. And you can do spot checking, or if you think there are real irregularities, you go back and do a total census of your ballots. It's unfortunate, but we don't have the security in the electronic systems yet, in the totally electronic systems, to be able to rely on the results. And I'm afraid that that's a lesson we have not learned. I became interested in the internet at a fairly early stage in its development, even though I was working for the UN. And when I was at Northwestern, we were on the internet, barely on the internet when I left, and it was important. I felt it was important for me to involve developing countries in this. So we've done a lot of training. This is the Internet Society with which I was associated. A lot of training of people how to get their country on the internet. It's possible to do that. How then to develop a network, a routed network in the country, and finally how to manage this new device, which is unlike anything else. The internet depends upon having a series of addresses. They're called IP addresses, and they're numeric addresses. And every machine, every device on the internet has one of these addresses. And if you look at it, it looks kind of strange, 198.62.20.44. You're not going to remember that. So in the mid-1980s, there was a system called the domain name system that was introduced above the IP address level, where you could have names that made sense, such as, Jones at harvard.edu. And the development of that domain name system has been rapid and really, really effective, because it means that there is essentially a global telephone book, except here it's a global device connected to the internet book, of everybody who's on the internet. And I can without any problem, if I knew Jones, I could be anywhere in the world and I could write an email to Jones at blah, blah, blah. That's a real breakthrough. Most of us carry the equivalent on our cell phones for telephone, but this is a worldwide system. Now the issue is the question of how do you extend that system? In the beginning, there were only 7 top-level domains, top level being .edu for educational institutions, .com for commercial, et cetera, et cetera. Those distinctions have broken down in the meantime, but the space was getting full. As of right now, there is something like 300 million domain names. In about 5 years ago, 6, 7 years ago, there was a push by a corporation called ICANN, Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, that is nominally in charge, nominally as the soft regulator of this domain namespace, saying we're running out of space. All of the words in the English language have been taken under .com. We need more space, and this is cyberspace. I'm often amused here because when I was taking economics courses, I remember reading Ricardo, and he said, "Buy real estate. There isn't any more being made. We've got the planet, and that's it." Well, he was wrong. Cyberspace opened up enormous activity in domain name acquisition and speculation, and that was causing the price of domain names to go up. Through ICANN, I'm on the board of ICANN, I need to say that, we have succeeded in enlarging that domain space by a factor of, I don't know, 60. So we now have the possibility of 1,200 domain names available to individuals to buy their names. So for example, some of the new names are .pharmacy, .health, .bank, .fishing, whatever, pretty much whatever you want. And as individuals and companies, organizations can get domain names in that space, and by virtue of having a semantic link between what they choose as the domain name and what their business is, they can become readily identified. Brand owners love this. Individuals like it too, and it looks like it's going to be a fair success. We've got something like 30 million new names in the last 2 years, and that's essentially the length of the program. New names have problems of their own, and that is that when you delegate a new name, you really have, you're talking to two groups or three groups of people. You're talking to a registry which runs the back end, and they are responsible for whenever a name is invoked in an email or in a web address, the registry is responsible for serving up the equivalent IP address, numeric address, for that person or for that website. You're talking to the registrars, which are the retail front ends for assigning these names, and then you're talking to the registrants, who are the buyers. So it's a three-level structure. The new names, in fact, are more likely to have problems with them than the old ones are, because often the back-end database the back-end database providers are new. The experience in running a registry in serving names hasn't been established. And so there's a lot of concern initially about would the new names, the truckload of new names, be subject to hacking in ways that we didn't anticipate. And it's turned out that some of these registries actually are rogue registries. They cater to hackers. But the great majority of them are quite safe and are learning as they go. Yeah. The Internet of Things is a new development. As computers have gotten cheaper, it's been possible to put logic, computing logic of one kind or another, in various devices. An example is a Nest thermostat, for example. It's a thermostat which has a computer inside it, and it has an internet connection. So, as Nest would like you to believe, as you're driving home, you can turn up the thermostat when you're 30 minutes away from home, and you can. And the thermostat also has sensors in it. It will sense when somebody is in a room. You can program it to do certain things at certain hours with overrides, such as if you come home early. So that kind of logic, it's really helpful. There are pacemakers, by the way, are essentially computers embedded under the skin. They're not on the internet, and it's a good thing they're not, because they can be hacked. Cameras are on the internet, just all kinds of devices. And you can make cheap things. The cost of adding internet capability is very low. And I'll give you an example which I think will illustrate the benefits and the costs. About a year ago, a company named Dyn, located in New Hampshire, was an internet company, was hacked. by approximately 500,000 devices that were constantly trying to get access to it. This is called a denial of service attack, where you fill the channel up with so much garbage, in effect, that no legitimate user can get in. And this can go on for some time. And there are ways of mitigating such attacks, but this was a particularly bad one. So where did it come from? It came from approximately 500,000 low-cost cameras, digital cameras, that had been sold by a Chinese firm and that were employed all over the world. Doesn't matter where. And the fact that there was computing capability in the camera meant that it could be hacked. And the security on the camera was incomplete. Hackers found it, and they developed a program in which they inserted into 500,000 of these cameras over the internet, and then at a given signal said, okay, do your stuff. Start sending pings to Dyn so that you can close it down. Now, this is a low-cost consumer device. To put more security in would cost money. To upgrade it, if you have a computer and your operating system needs upgrading, there's a way of doing it. If you buy a low-cost consumer device at Best Buy or someplace like that, the manufacturer doesn't know where it's going, may not be able to find it because you don't register it. It doesn't know what its address is, and so there's little the upgrade, the securitization of the device is unlikely. So you have computers in objects out on the internet that are not protected as well as they could be, not upgradable by the manufacturer, and there are going to be billions of these things. This is the challenge: how to deal with the Internet of Things to keep the internet secure. I'm sure that there's a lot of money in it, but it's not something that the device manufacturer itself, the camera manufacturer, is going to invest in. This is a Pandora's box situation right now, and it's one of my colleagues who just lectured on the Internet of Things calls it IoT is the Internet of Trash, because it's going to be taken over by a lot of trash. There'll be a lot of issues coming from this. I think we will prevail, but I don't see the mechanism right now. But somebody will rise to the challenge. Maybe Google. Who knows? Well, when we graduated from college, a programmer was either, if you talked about what was a programmer, it was something else other than a computer programmer. Computer science has grown a lot in the last 60 years, and now it's a favored major among students who are graduating, and for good reason. The jobs are there. The jobs are there, and they pay well. There's a scarcity, and that drives up incomes. The question has been raised often about what should the ethics of computer science and computer programming be? If you're an engineer, if you're a civil engineer, you have to be certified. If you're a doctor, you go through rigorous examination to make sure that you really are a doctor and you have the credentials and you understand the field. The same with lawyers. Question, should this apply to computer science? There have been a variety of attempts from the Association for Computing Machinery to say, we want to define best practices, we want to define a code of ethics, and so on. And that has happened. But there is nothing to this day that stops anybody from programming, selling software, and the like. There's been nothing to guarantee, first, their competence, and second, their ethics. And so that's a little bit of a dicey situation, because we need to teach people, students, general public, that the use of tools like this is, well, this is maybe an old-fashioned view, but it's a privilege rather than a right, and that we need to respect the implications of what we're doing on the network, just as we respect the implications of what we're doing when we drive a car or if we fly an airplane. And that's going to be a longer time coming, because the the development of software, it's an art. People argue whether it's engineering or science or an art. I think it's an art. And the malleability of the substance that you're dealing with is so great that you can design something and then you can take it apart and design something else and so on. Is the absolute opposite of architecture, where when you pour the concrete, it's going to be there for a long time. This is stuff that's malleable and it's fun, and it gives you a sense of power over the objects that you're manipulating, whether they're a payroll ledger or whether they're a program in artificial intelligence. And I think that goes to some people's heads. And we don't have the mechanisms yet. We don't have the societal view of the importance of reflecting the values of the society, the good values, the positive values, into what we do on the internet and what we do with computers. Now, the vast majority of people who use computers understand this either consciously or unconsciously, or maybe it's just part of their upbringing. But there are still enough renegades that it's a situation that will ultimately, I think, be solved. But we haven't solved it yet, and I'm not quite sure how we're going to solve it. We have a lot of unsolved problems. You know, in our reunion, somebody made the remark that when we were graduating, it was the class of 1897 that was celebrating their 60th anniversary. And I thought, oh my God, what have they lived through? All kinds of things that simply didn't exist. And so it's interesting to think, what will the class of 2017 be faced with when they come back for their 60th year reunion? What will have happened to the internet? What will have happened to the digital revolution? And there are a number of possible futures. I think about this from time to time. I'm alternately enthusiastic and depressed. The most positive approach would be, we've learned how to deal with the security issues to the point where they are not a major concern in our life. And we're dealing with them just as you have off-network human behavior, which is illegal. So you're going to have some on-network human behavior that's illegal. But the internet will have allowed us to have essentially universal knowledge, universal access to information of all kinds, universal discussion between people who discover each other on the internet, a lot of advancement in areas I don't know. For example, in medicine, I don't understand how computers are used in medicine. I understand it to a limited extent, but a lot of advances in medicine have depended upon computers. CAT scans, for example, MRIs, impossible without computers because they do the image reconstruction. Where is this going to go? We don't know. But the people who are going to take advantage of it are the people who are graduating today and who are going to medical school and who understand information technology and who are going to exploit it in the best possible sense. And I can't predict what they're going to do. The most pessimistic scenario is that we really won't be able to control misuse of the net unless we go to more authoritarian forms of control over it. And China is a perfect example. The Chinese government is in the process of restricting free expression on the net. And their thesis is, if we restrict free expression, we'll be able to allow those things that contribute to our growth and development, but we'll also be able to target and identify and prosecute the people who do things that are harmful to our environment. And the truth is going to be somewhere in between, and I wish I knew how it was going to work out. I just don't know. There's some developments now that make me hopeful. First of all, the FBI has a well-developed core of cyber cops. Second, Interpol, the International Police Organization in Lyon, has finally understood. They were laggards. They finally understood that this is an important subject, and they need to develop the capacity to deal with it. Europol. I talked with some Europol people a couple of weeks ago in Geneva, and they seem to have been developing the ability to go after cyber criminals. The issue, it has to be international, because the person committing the crime can go through computers elsewhere that are unguarded and makes quite a few hops and then commit the crime in another jurisdiction. And it takes time to go back and check those links to trace to get the perp to find out where they are. Now, another possibility is that the Internet Engineering Task Force, which sets standards for the internet, and governments as a whole may find a path to harden the internet, to say, if you're doing this, that's not legal. We can't allow you to do this, because it's such as running an open relay through which a criminal can thread his or her way to the ultimate crime scene. That's going to be under development, I think. I don't see a way around it. And I think we are going to have to go to a slightly more authoritarian way of dealing with the net. The costs are just too high. The cost of a crime committed on the internet can be in the millions of dollars. And we haven't established yet, in terms of punishment, proportionality with respect to the value of the crime versus the cost of the punishment. So we need to work on that, and in part that will come too, because the entire legal profession has been caught, I think, a little bit short by this, and they are developing the skills to understand what is computer crime, what is an acceptable trail of evidence that you can present in a courtroom if you're in digital space. All of those things, they're new to all of us. And we're exploring this space, and we know it has enormous potential, but we also don't fully understand it, and we're working on it. Starting about 10 years ago, we saw the influence of the internet with respect to democratization in the Middle East. The Arab Revolution was caused in part by the internet, in part by SMS messages that were sent by phones, and in part by smartphones. The ability to message, the ability for citizens to self-organize. And that is something which was, I don't think there was a technology that allowed that before. The mail didn't do it, phone chains didn't do it. You had, but with the internet and with the web, people could say, "No, I've got a position here. I want to do something. Help me," and it would be seen by many people. The internet is a self-publishing medium. I can write something on the internet, and it will be seen, at least in theory, by millions of people within the next minute. And if you know where to look, and you know, you're essentially making a market in information. And if you make that market in information relating to organization, what you have is the ability to mobilize people on very short notice in secret. Well, not quite in secret, because your opponents might be looking at the same website. But nevertheless, it gave voice to millions of people in the Arab countries so that they could, in effect, make changes. Now, the problem is that didn't work very well. It worked well in Tunisia, where it started, because Tunisia has had a more liberal government, and in Tunisia for a long time, women have been considered the equal of men, which is not true of much of the rest of the Arab world. And we've seen some disasters as a result of that. But the ability for citizens, for people to speak their mind, the ability to self-organize, I think is probably one of the most important things that will come out of the penetration of the internet into every country in the world.